It's time to take a look at this 1.7 CN tier list. Welcome back to Cocky Gachas, and in this video, we'll be taking a look at the CN tier list that just came out for 1.7. And I've been waiting specifically for the lower half of 1.7 to come before I take a look at their tier list. So I'll be personally taking a look at what they think of the units, right, and give my personal thought on why I agree or disagree with their take. So starting first, we are going to have tier 2. Initially, I did not want to actually cover tier 2. There's also a tier 3 minus. I didn't want to cover it because it's 4 or 5 stars, but as you can see on the screen for yourself, there is one outlier. If you have played Reverse 1999 and you have played Raids, right, specifically you will know that Necrologists do not belong in this tier, right? The rest of the units, sure, you can put them in this tier. However, Necrologists should deserve better, right? Necrologist is a god pick in Raids itself, and with the focus of Raids even in CN server, I do not think that it deserves a tier 2 rating. Only should be moved up with the prayer, with the damage increase, which helps a lot with in an environment whereby there's a lot of damage reduction. Other than that, the rest of the tiers I'm not going to explain too much. They're all 5-star units that are not as relevant as compared to your balloon parties, as compared to your Yen side, okay? And speaking of our Yen side and balloon party, all of these relevant 5-star units, right, they're actually in tier 1.5 that we are going to touch on now. So on your screen you can see they are full of 6-star units, as well as also including 2 5-star units in Yen side and balloon party. The graphic actually missed out balloon party, so I have checked out the video itself. It is in fact in tier 1.5 according to them. But I do not agree, right? Specifically starting with Yen side as well as balloon party, these 2 5-star healers are extremely strong. And in this game, in 1.7, even then, there is not enough healers, right? There is no introduction of new OP healers that surpass 2 fairy, and the same roster can be seen in our 1.4. So with the addition of Yen side, which is also a very strong single target healer, in fact, I think it's a 2 target healer, and she gives a really good shield as well. So I'm not too sure why they actually rank it in tier 1.5. Even if you were to say that this tier list is raid focused, Yen side and balloon party should be moved higher up. So I do not agree with this 1.5, should be at least tier 1. And also moving on, we are going to have Medicine Pocket. Similarly, I also think that Medicine Pocket has been ranked a bit too low, and I think Medicine Pocket should be moved to tier 1 as well. Even in raids, right, in the scenario in 1.7, I do still see some people running Medicine Pocket, especially if they have missed out on 2 fairy, right? So just imagine a new beginner missing out on 2 fairy banner. You're probably going to be using Medicine Pocket. Of course, there's a rerun of 2 fairy, maybe that have alleviated things and caused them to actually rank Medicine Pocket in 1.5. Regardless, I think a Medicine Pocket should be slightly higher. Now, next we have New Babel. Now, what I cannot accept is that New Babel is actually ahead of Yen side and balloon party. I don't know what this tier list is thinking of, but I specifically picked this because this tier list has 100k views on Bilibili, and it's one of the most popular ones already. So this one, right, they actually put New Babel in 1.5. I strongly disagree. I think New Babel should be in tier 2. Even then, in 1.7, from what I have seen the content, it doesn't specifically favor New Babel, and New Babel is really weak, except for maybe U2, right? But if you just want to put her in 1.5 because of U2, I don't think it's going to be fair. Okay, so New Babel, disagree, going to rate her lower if it's my personal tier list. Moving on, next we have Lilia, we have Eternity, Regulars, as well as Voyager. So one of these units are not the same as the rest. Lilia, Regulars, as well as Voyager, these 3 units are actually very relevant in the Sea Serpent raid. And I think the Sea Serpent raid will still continue to rerun in the future, so I'm not sure why they're actually being placed in 1.5. Regardless, Eternity is the odd one out. I think Eternity is really in a very awkward spot right now in 1.7, especially, right? Even in 1.4, Eternity doesn't find much use anymore. Low damage, you don't really need the sustain factor because we have good healers right now, so you don't really want to use Eternity that much, right? Compared to other mineral types such as Calabuana, you have all of the good mineral damage. You don't really need to go for Eternity, even if you can just use Pickles, right? Pickles is so much better than Eternity. So I would think Eternity, if anyone should be on the bottom of the tier list, right? Eternity should be slightly just higher than New Babel only. Okay, so for the rest of the 3, I think if you want to put them in 1.5, sure, maybe they don't think that Sea Serpent, just for that themselves, it's that relevant. But Voyager by herself is also a strong support. Regulus is one of the strongest star sub DPS as well. But I'm thinking also because now in 1.7 there are so many national teams, right, whereby it is cross afflictors, so afflictors really doesn't play that much of a role anymore according to this tier list specifically. So I'm just trying to reason with them, but if you were to ask me, I don't exactly agree with this take. Okay, now next, moving on to tier 1, you can see we have a series of 6-star units, and of course we have 2 5-star units in Beacon as well as Charlie. Charlie is in fact being named as the bottom of the tier 1, right, and then Beacon is slightly to the top of the tier 1. So for these 2 units, I want to first touch on them. I think that it is quite a fair rating. Tier 1 should be fine, and I'm going to assume that they are referring to, of course, the P5 versions, even though Beacon at P0, I think she's still quite relevant. With her I3, she's able to tank a lot more damage. Hence, I think even in 1.7, she's going to be very relevant. Of course, right, there is also a take to say that Beacon as well as debuffers such as like Charmaine, etc., they should be moved lower in the tier because, right, once we move towards like beyond 1.4, right, every patch is going to have a raid. So being raid focused, right, the only really good raid for these debuffers are going to be Go in the Cave, but you can really see, right, with the HP bars and all this kind of things, right, negative status as well as the debuffers are not going to be that favored anymore in a raid focused content. So I personally think that Beacon should be much lower, while Charlie can be moved slightly further up, right, because Charlie is still quite relevant as a DPS even outside of Sea Serpent. So this is my take on the 2 units. Now moving on to the rest of the 6-star units, right, starting with Druvis. So Druvis over here, it's quite fair. I think she's still in tier 1 outside of raid content. You probably can use her to a great effect since there are less control immunity factors. However, I do seen that Limbo has started to introduce some of this control immunity, and also U2 is also quite famous, right? Some of the sages do have like control immunity, so this is where she suffers the most. And with, like I mentioned, right, being a raid focused kind of environment, Druvis has really fallen out quite a bit. Okay, but of course with the introduction of Marcus, right, I think Druvis can be a support unit that is quite great just for providing the life leech for Marcus for the team building aspect. So this is where I think her role plays in currently in 1.7. Now next up, we are going to have Isra. Personally, I don't think Isra deserves T1. Probably would move Isra to T1.5 if anything, right? Because if you just look at it, if Lilia, Regulus and Voyager, which are Sea Serpent focused, are moved to 1.5, then what makes Isra so strong that she can be in T1, right? Outside of Sea Serpent, she really doesn't see that much use, and a lot of people claim that she's a Eureka support, but the fact is she just isn't that good of a Eureka support, right? Her main point isn't that her ultimate boosts Eureka, but honestly, you are better off just using a normal card and getting Eureka that way, right? Getting 1 extra Eureka isn't going to be that good. So honestly, don't see her value, and shielders in this game are just not great at the moment. And even in 1.7, I don't see that much need for shielders, which is also why I think this Isra in this tier list is a bit overrated. Moving on, next we are going to have Sotheby. Similarly, Sotheby, right, if you want to claim that Yenisai, Balloon Party, as well as Medicine Pocket is in 1.5, and you're putting Sotheby in tier 1, I think it's a bit weird. However, I do believe that they are considering the fact that Jessica as well as Marcus uses Sotheby as a support. Of course, right, my take is that Marcus runs better without Sotheby, runs better actually with Druvis. So I'm not too sure why they put her in tier 1, but I do not agree. Her heal isn't that good at all, and the debuff card is not the best, and there are much more options when it comes to applying poison now or negative status for Blasphemy in your neck. You have 6, you have Isolde, you don't really need her at all. So I think she should be moved down at least to tier 1.5. Now moving on, next we are going to have Anli. Seeing Anli beside Sotheby just makes me feel weird, right? So looking at the units that they have for tier 0.5, later you'll see for yourself, I think it's fair that Anli is here. However, I do think that there is also a chance that I might lean towards tier 0.5 for Anli. I think she's still extremely relevant despite the fact that there is 6 as a support. However, the passive upgrading card aspect is very, very strong, and in 1.7, where Marcus is being released, she is one of the best teammates for Marcus, specifically with 6, making her much more valuable. So maybe their tier 1 is relatively high. I don't think that she should be this low, right, in 1.7. I think it's fair to move her to at least the end of tier 0.5 if anything, okay? So this is my take on Anli. Extremely, extremely strong still. Next, we are going to have A Knight, and A Knight, I think A-Knight should be pretty fair in this tier 1 list. I don't think that A-Knight is able to move into tier 0.5 because for a lot of rates, A-Knight isn't exactly that good. But of course, since 1.4, where there is balance, please, A-Knight's rank have definitely ranked up a bit more, right? Maybe now he's a sergeant or commander already, so A commander. So he's really quite strong. He does good damage as well as also being a Spirit Reflectors means that you can bring him anywhere. Overall, a very solid DPS unit. Okay, next we're going to have Centurion. And Centurion in tier 1 is a bit surprising. I'm not sure why Centurion is still that much favored, especially with the rise of Spectodier with Isolde as well as Melania always being a raid queen, right? With so much content being focused on raid and this tier list seemingly being geared towards raid, right? I'm not too sure why Centurion is being rated this highly. If you were to ask me, I think Centurion probably ranks a bit lower in the tier 1 if you really want to keep her in tier 1, and definitely not as strong as A-Knight in some of this content. And I think that this tier list is actually overrating Centurion a bit, right? She doesn't do that much anymore, so I think not too fair to put her this high in tier 1. Next, we are going to have Pickles. I think Pickles is fine over here. Almost the top of tier 1 already, and Pickles is still quite relevant, especially also in raid content. But like I've mentioned, right, Necrologist and Pickles, these two units are great in raid content because of the fact that they increase the damage dealt. And this is going to be relevant especially at the later HP bars, but their ranking has dropped a bit, right? Also personally, given the fact that there is now the mechanic called the skipping HP bar, whereby you remove 2 HP bar at once to reduce the number of damage reductions that you potentially get from Resurgence, right? This is a very strong strategy that I've seen in 1.7, even 1.6 people have been doing it quite a lot. And of course, I don't think that this tier list is advanced enough to convert to actually take that into consideration. So I think it's quite fair to say Pickles is still very high. Regardless, Pickles is very AP generous, right? With or without the skipping HP bar strategy, right? Still deserves a spot in tier 1 for sure. And then lastly, right, since we already covered Beacon just now, we're going to touch on Charmaine. And for Charmaine, he is at the top of tier 1. Honestly, I think Charmaine might be a bit too high over here. Like I've mentioned, right, the buffers not being that good in raid content. I'm not too sure if they are referring to high portraits. Of course, I don't think so, right? This tier list seems to be a P0 tier list from what I can read. So if that's the case, a P0 Charmaine shouldn't rank this high. However, if you were to consider the fact that, okay, mental DPS are on the rise, right? Marcus is also mental DPS. For a 4-man team, maybe you want to even slot in Charmaine. I'm not too sure the reasoning, but I do think that Charmaine does have his place, and of course, right, he still does decent DPS as well, so maybe this is what their consideration is, but personally, I think it's a bit too high for Charmaine. Now moving on to our tier 0.5, so these are really the semi-gods already, right, in this Reverse 1999 as of this moment. And the first one, at the end of the tier, we're going to have Ge-Tian. And Ge-Tian, the reason why he is this high up, I do believe, is because of the presence of their meta team. Like I've mentioned, right, showed you in the video. If you haven't watched that yet, you can check out the card in the top right hand corner. And that meta team consists of Isolde, Ge-Tian, Spectodier, as well as 2 fairies. So this 4-man team is also like the national team, like I've mentioned, right? It really surpasses all the Afflectors nonsense because this is a reality DPS focused team, of course with the burn support coming in from Isolde. So this overall team is extremely strong, so maybe this is the reason why they rate it a bit higher, but by himself, I think Ge-Tian isn't that strong, to be very honest. There are some restrictions put in place for Ge-Tian before he can actually shine, and there are so many substitutes, right, especially of course in 6, and also any debuffer can definitely replace Ge-Tian in specific roles, right? Of course not within that specific meta team, but I still think that it might be a bit too high for my personal taste. Okay, next we are going to have Black Dwarf. So Black Dwarf, from the start of her release in 1.3, I think Black Dwarf has already proven herself to be very strong. Of course, right, her brightness has been overshadowed a bit, right, by the release of Qiniang during the limited banner event, right? And Qiniang is a mineral type as well, so Qiniang is the most busted shit I've seen since her release. So naturally, it makes me think that Calabuana hasn't been the biggest pick for CM players, right? But seeing this, her still being in 0.5 has restored my faith in CM players. I think she's still extremely strong with her balls, with her follow-up attacks, right? So the DPS is not shabby at all, just that if you were to compare it to an alien like Chinyang, she might pale a bit in comparison, but regardless, I think she's still very strong. So deservingly tier 0.5, right? One of the strongest DPS in the game right now, even in 1.7. Now moving on, next we have Melania. For a 1.1 character, Melania has been surviving very well since the day that she was told to be released. I did my research and I've seen that she does extremely well in raids, and I know that she's going to be good from then on, and it seems like I was right, because she's still very strong in current day. If you guys have Melania, you will know what I'm talking about, right? Basically, any raid you can put in Melania. Even Sea Serpent raid, Melania is quite decent. I wouldn't say she's the best, of course Genesis damage is being favored over there, and you really want Star Flectors units. But just from the fact that even in a raid that counters her, she is decent, that just shows that she is really strong, especially in the U2 also, right? U2, if you have the cards that give her ultimate first, then she can build up very fast, or if you have cards that stack all of the at the end of the round with her actions, she stacks up really insanely well. So everything combined, she is really strong, and T0 seems really fitting for her. Next, we're going to have Jessica, and Jessica seems to be still rated very highly, even though Marcus has been released. And if you were to ask me, right, with the release of Marcus, I think Jessica's role have really definitely have moved back a bit. So I know that CM players still like Jessica, and they still use Jessica. I'm not saying that Jessica is weak at all, but I'm saying that Marcus is basically a better Jessica these days, and I'm going to speak more about that later, and I know that some people are going to disagree with me, but Jessica's advantage relies on having Blessed on Night uptime, and then having the poison stacks. She's going to deal a lot of AoE damage, but in a single target focus environment in raids, right, I don't think that she should be rated that highly. So I do feel that she should be rated a bit lower. Regardless, right, she's still very strong. So like I mentioned, right, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to say that she's not a good DPS anymore. Tier 0.5 is fine. I just think that she should fall a bit more to the end of tier 0.5 if anything. Okay, next we are going to have Spatodia, and for Spatodia, right, here they did mention a special thing, which is saying that higher portraits is T0. So I also agree with that. Of course, in this case, I do believe that they are trying to assume that you're going to run Isolde with her, similar to Gertian, right? Just by herself, Spatodia, I think she is good, but she isn't this good, right? In fact, I would say that she is worse than Melania if you just run her by herself without the support. But of course, right, that we can say in the past, right, but Isolde has been released, so if you run her together with Isolde, pretty much she's going to be very strong, right? With the burn stacks being on, she just needs 15, she's going to ultimate one punch go, pam, everything should be cleared, right? All raids going to triple S, and on top of that, with the presence of the national team with Gertian, all the reality DPS nonsense, she's quite highly favored. So I think tier 0.5 and tier 0 if high portraits is quite relevant, right? Of course, other units might also be tier 0 if they are at portrait 0. Next, we're going to have Marcus, and Marcus, right, is honestly quite strong. In fact, I do think that Marcus might inch better to tier 0. I know a lot of people disagree. From what they have seen, they are going to call Marcus restrictive, needing like other plant units to actually work, but the fact is she does want to work in those teams, right? Why would you not want to pair up with other units like that? You also can slot in the intellect reflectors, and 6 is the best candidate. I do believe the clause is there because of 6, and just with that, right, in the 4-man team, you just need to add one other member. You don't have to add Sotheby. You can go with 2 fairy and then just run one other plant support like Anandi, and then it's going to be a perfect team, right? 6 is going to buff her, and then she's going to buff herself. She's going to level out her cards every turn. She's going to use rank 2 cards, rank 3 cards, and the numbers might seem smaller compared to other units' high rank cards, but the fact that she always uses these cards, right, means that her average multiplier is extremely high, and her average DPM is extremely high as well, and also she's able to spam ultimate very quickly. So a lot of people overlook this, and I think this is why she's kind of underrated in the global sentiment. But I think once 1.7 releases and people get a feel for her, you're going to see how OP she is. And also, right, I think CM players have been complaining a bit about power creep as well. I'm seeing the NGA threads, I'm seeing the Bilibili comments. All of these comments are prevalent because it is true, power creep is something that has happened already, because the stats naturally have to go up, otherwise Bluepop cannot sell the unit. So people are really saying this as a fact. They are not really exactly complaining. CN isn't complaining, but they are just like addressing the fact that this has already happened, and Marcus is a good example of that. So she's extremely strong. If you were to ask me, I think she deserves T0, honestly, right? Of course, that might be just the new benchmark. Now, lastly, for 37, they listed her as the top of T0.5, and I think this is quite garbage. I cannot accept the fact that 37 is actually at the top of T0.5 in the face of all of these other units, right? Outside of Sea Serpent Raid, she isn't that good. Even if you were to consider the fact that she's a support for Qiniang, she's not rated that high. She doesn't do that good damage. There are other meta teams right now, right? In 1.7, like I mentioned, the Spatodia, Isot team, you don't really exactly need her as well, right? Qiniang doesn't need her, so she pretty much needs Qiniang. So although I'm a fan of 37 as well and her triangles, right, I still think that objectively she's rated a bit too high on this tier list. I'm not sure what they're smoking, but she also mentioned that if it's high portrays, it's T0. Okay, this I respect, but at P0, she can't be this high, okay? Don't kid me. Genesis damage is not that OP yet. I've just checked in 1.7. Their content hasn't increased the defense drastically until that. In fact, it's very similar to the defense that we are having right now in Limbo in U2. So definitely overrated in this tier list. Okay, now moving on next into our tier 0, we have 4 units, and these 4 units I have no complaints. I agree with the tiers, and I'm just going to explain why they are strong. Firstly, we are going to have Isot, and Isot, right, might be bordering tier 0.5 at the top of it, but I think putting her in tier 0 is still fair. She's extremely strong, of course, not just as a burn support, right? I'm calling her a burn support because that is her primary use in a team with Spatodia. But just by herself, she still does a lot of damage, right? And especially if you were to play her well, I think she does rival sub, like in the middle of sub DPS and carry tier DPS already. So for a support to actually do this, it's quite ridiculous. However, I do have reasons also to say that she can be potentially lowered to tier 0.5. I think, right, outside of raids, she isn't that good. Okay, so she needs the long rounds to actually scale. I'm not delusional enough to say that she functions well in short battles. In short battles, right, a normal debuffo probably will outweigh her. But like I've mentioned, right, I think that in 1.7 context, the environment, a lot of it is already about raid focus. So that's the only content people have problems with, to getting triple S or getting even higher score, right? That's their goal. So tier lists are more geared towards that already. And with that in mind, she does deserve tier 0 because she does really well in raids whereby she can definitely reach her different stage, right? The finale, the interlude, the nonsense, right? So all of this can be reached in a raid context. Okay, so tier 0. Next, we're going to have 6 from start to end. 6 is the NPC that carries. He really supports very well, AP generous, all of these kind of things as mentioned 1,000 times. So tier 0, just pull him in 1.4, don't ask any questions. Okay, moving on. Next, we have Qiniang. Qiniang is 1.6, like I mentioned just now, limited banner character with the animated portrait, or only character with animated portrait. So that already makes her special, but of course, right, the main part is the numbers. She does a lot of numbers and it's in a good context. Very high DPS counts, basically power crap everything when she came out. Of course, some conditions does have to apply, and her DPS comes mainly from a channeling aspect, right? So if you can break the channeling, she's not going to do as good DPS, but in most contexts, in most raids, not going to have a problem doing so. So I think Qiniang deservingly is T0. And then lastly, we're going to have 2 Fairy, and I'm quite relieved to see that Qiniang isn't ahead of 2 Fairy, and I do agree with the fact that 2 Fairy should be the queen of Reverse 1999, and it is because first, limited healers, and also second, since 1.2 till now, no other healer can rival her. She crit debuffs, right, allowing your units to crit more, and all of this is done passively. Actively, you can increase the crit rate further, and also ultimate can cleanse, and then your heals are also great, right? Passive healing also, what more do you want from a healer? So I don't want to say more already. We have spoke many good words about 2 Fairy, and I'm just glad to see that she is in fact retaining the tier list in CN server. Now, of course, as much as I disagree with some of the placements of this tier list, still credits to this Bilibili content creator, 绝对不是弟弟. So if you want to check out the full video for yourself, go and see in the description below. I have linked it as well. And also, if you're interested in seeing, right, one of the T0 characters, why he's so strong, right, why exactly 6 is so strong that I didn't explain in this video, check out this video. I'll see you guys over there. This is Cocky Gachas, signing off.